Hi, everyone. This is Christine Tully. I'm a senior writing coach at Defend and Publish, and welcome to episode 18, Grading Time versus Writing Time. We're at the point in the semester where many of us have grading responsibilities. If you're teaching this semester, this is probably rounding the bend to finish out the spring, and you may have a finals week coming up. You may have a lot of student projects coming in, and that's an additional pressure on your time that doesn't exist during what we might call normal weeks in our semester. And one of the things I started thinking about is what typically happens when one of these heavy, intense grading weeks falls on us. One of the things that tends to happen is that grading is something that gets prioritized and ends up squeezing writing out. So even if you normally keep to a writing schedule, like myself, you might end up having a lot of a lot of student projects to grade, and you just might not get to your writing. So I know for a long time I would say, well, when I finish this grade, grading this stack of papers for this class, or when I finish scoring these exams, then I can go to my own writing. But we probably all know, all too well what ends up happening when we get to that point. And many of us are just mentally and physically tired. Grading is a lot like writing in the sense that it does require a lot of sitting. It's not a lot of, active movement. Your body gets sore, your brain gets sore trying to think through, the mathematical elements or how to do some written commentary on a particularly challenging student project. So what I'd like to do for this week is just talk through a couple of ways that you can still get some writing done, even in a time of heavy, intense grading. And these are a few based on personal experience and a few that I thought of as I was working through my own grading yesterday. So one of the things I think is helpful is to determine how much grading you have to do in terms of how much you have left. So one thing that I did yesterday is I actually looked at the 4 classes that I'm in charge of. 2 of our teaching assistant classes that I supervise, and then 2 are my own classes of first year writing. So altogether, each section has about 15 students. That's about 60 students that I need to figure out what's happening with all their grades. Is everything graded? All these students turn in portfolios, so I need to make sure that some students have those. Lots of students are sending emails at this time of year where they're actually asking for, of course, extra credit or to get something graded that might have been late. And so there needs to be a method to keep track of all of that. And while this might not seem like it has anything to do with your writing, I promise you it does, as I discovered yesterday. So what I ended up doing yesterday was going through all 4 of my classes and printing out all of my rosters and just going through quickly with all those student names and figuring out who had what needed to be graded, who needed to be responded to. So I had an overall look at what my grading workload looked like. This was really useful for planning the upcoming week for me, because then I could look and see, well, if I really have, say, 15 of these argument essays that are about 12 pages a piece, I know about how fast I can grade through those. And I knew that one thing I could tell right away is that I don't have a whole lot of extra time to get some writing done. Better to know that at the beginning of the week rather than try, being anxious that you can't get to your writing throughout the week. So one of the things that I ended up doing then, once I figured out my timing for the grading, is I did a little bit of carving up of that grading. So meaning I put it into different buckets. So when I would get to different time periods where I could do it, I would knock out different tasks. So the way that I broke it up is I actually broke it up by class. That's the way a lot of us end up doing, I think, our grading, because it's just easier to keep the students together in the class that you're working in. And I did the same thing using those rosters that I had. I ended up just going student by student and made sure I basically cleared out each student so they're ready for me to log a final grade. So I did all remaining grading for that student. I answered all the emails from that student. I did everything that I needed to do. And so one of the things this did for me was it did free up some mental baggage, because one of the things that happens at this point in the semester is I think a lot of us are carrying around, oh, I've got to respond to that email, or, oh, I promised that student they could redo that quiz, or, all those things. So that's one of the ways that I divided up my work, was to just go by class and then go by student. And then even within there, I carved it up again, where I maybe would divide each class up into groups of 5. So I deal with 5 students at a time and then do something else, 5 students at a time, deal with something else. And that actually proved to be very helpful. So the way that I worked some writing in yesterday was I worked my way through 5 students, which took me about 2 hours because I had quite a bit of things to do for them. Took a little break. I took just 1 hour to do some writing, and I gave myself permission to do a very low pressure writing session. So all I did was open up where I was in my writing project last time. I read through the work that I had started. I'm in the middle of writing a new article, as you may have heard in some of our previous podcasts. And what I did there is all I did was take some notes. Here's some things I know I want to add. Here's a couple of things I think might be cool angles to explore. I just took some notes on my writing. That was it. And then I was able to write down, I don't know, maybe a paragraph, not very much in that 1 hour session. But when I was finished, I felt like that pressure had been released, that I was able to get some writing done. Wasn't amazing, but I did spend a little bit of time with my writing. And then I went back and I did another group of 5 students, took another break, and then knocked out the last 5. That was my whole day. So for many of us that are, facing mounds and mounds of papers or quizzes, that's like, it was, I don't know, maybe a 10 to 12 hour day. I don't remember what it ended up being with everything once I got it all finished, but I did still get some writing done. And so I think that's the important lesson here. Another way to think about this happening is that even if you're dividing up your work into those segments and you're, doing a little bit of writing, is to think about what will work best for you. So what I did was I said, okay, I want to make sure I'm writing at least 3 times this week. I don't care when those 3 times are, but they're going to happen. So when I was working through those stacks, that one class of papers, where I said that I divided it up into little groups of 5, and I wrote one between one of those 5 student segments. One of the other ways that I thought about doing some writing is that working with writing very first thing before I do any grading. So in here, what I might do is I suspect I might feel a sense of panic. This is going to be one of my strategies for next week, is that I'm just going to worry about writing for a half hour. I'm going to open my document from 9 to 9:30. I'm just going to write as much as I can. And if I feel like at that point at 9:30, I just got to start grading, or I'm going to start freaking out because I have a lot of grading to do. Then I'm going to go and do it. If I can hang on for another half hour and do it still, I'm really in my groove with my writing, I'm going to do that. But again, I'm limiting that writing session to an hour because I got a lot of other work to do. I'm probably, facing down again another 9 or 10 hour day to knock out that work. So, I think there's some creative ways to think about it, but I think we want to get away from that feeling of all or nothing, that, oh, it's finals week, I don't do any writing this week. Or, oh, it's the week before finals week, all these student projects are coming in, I don't get any writing done that week. That doesn't seem to be productive in really working with the contours of a faculty life. Because one of the things I think is, we probably all recognize, whether you're a new faculty member or a graduate student kind of moving into that area, is that if we're still always teaching and we're still always trying to have a writing life in there, we've got to figure out a way to make the grading and the writing work together. So scheduling is certainly one of those things. So we talked about that. The second thing I just mentioned was kind of not allowing yourself to get away with skipping writing for the week. So that would be a second strategy. For me, I said it's got to happen at least 3 times. I'm still trying to go for hitting it 5 times in the week, but 3 is my minimum. So if I get to the end of the week and I don't have some of those things graded, but I also don't have my 3rd writing session in, I am going to do that before I get to that grading. And I know the grading itself will kind of push me to move faster through my writing and get some things done. Another thing that I think is really helpful, this is a third strategy that might be useful, is if you're doing anything where you're providing feedback for students in any kind, on anything, written responses, discussion board prompts, papers, lab reports, white papers, whatever it is that you're doing. A lot of times we are giving feedback to students that we actually could stand to use ourselves. So I've noticed this a lot with the graduate students that I'm working with right now, that they're very skilled in writing instructors. So they can read a set of first-year writing papers and find all kinds of things that need to be improved. But then when they go to their own writing, they don't have that same level of, I don't know if we want to call them, their, writing teacher goggles. They just don't have the same, maybe the same way of looking at their writing. And so this is something that I'm trying to pay a little bit more attention to, even in my own writing, is that when I go to a writing session with myself, I do try to look at it in the way that I'm an outside person. So either a teacher or an audience or something like that, just to check for clarity of meaning. Here would be a good example. I know one of the things that I just suggested to a bunch of my first year writing students is that they work with replacing verbs like says and states when they're quoting something from an article. And so I told them that, you really should be using some signal verbs. And then I gave them a link to a bunch of different signal verbs. But then when I went back into my own writing, I saw I didn't use says or states, but I did in there use the word like, this author acknowledges or this author suggests. And I use those two things kind of as my only signal verbs through my paper. And once I saw that signal verbs list, I found a whole bunch of other words that sounded, better. They clarified meaning. They were kind of fun to work in, especially if your brain is fried from grading, 50 papers in a day or whatever you're doing. So, I think that a lot of using the skills that you're using with your students sometimes can translate to your own writing. And that's another way to kind of think about the teaching of writing and the writing you're doing as integrated. Not all of us teach writing. You might be teaching something that is, math or something that doesn't relate to writing in the same way. But even looking for things where, you're doing a careful thing of, say, checking students' work. You might have a pattern or a system for doing that then can translate to the way that you're actually looking at your writing. So this week, I'd encourage you to just think about some of those teaching and writing connections. So I hope this was helpful, and happy writing.